You ever have a moment where you look at a piece of wood and realize you've been treating it like a stubborn toddler when you should have been treating it like a puzzle box?
Is this about that mahogany sideboard you almost threw out the window last Tuesday?
It's about the philosophy of the thing, Alex. I spent 3 hours trying to force a tenon into a mortise with a rubber mallet and sheer willpower. Then I sat down, picked up a book by Dorian Bracht, and realized the Japanese figured out how to make those two pieces of wood fall in love 300 years ago without a single drop of glue.
So we're going full Zen today. Japanese joinery. I've seen the videos of those massive temple beams clicking together like Lego bricks made by gods. It's intimidating, Tiger. It feels like you need a PhD in geometry and the patience of a monk just to pick up the saw.
It's not about being a monk, though the quiet helps. It's about precision that actually makes your life easier. We're diving deep today. We're talking about Dorian Bracht's new work, the evolution of these joints from ancient temples to modern Berlin workshops, and why your Western dovetail is basically a blunt instrument compared to a kompawa.
What now? You're already using words that sound like they cost $50.
It's the joint fetishist himself, Dorian Bracht. The man is a legend. Born in LA, raised in Hong Kong, trained in Germany, he's like the Indiana Jones of wood joints. He decided he wanted to cut every joint in existence. Think about that. Most of us find one way to stick two boards together, and we stick to it like a security blanket.
I've seen his stuff. He's the guy who does those joint venture videos, right? Super clean, no music, just the sound of the chisel paring away wood. It's strangely hypnotic, like ASMR for people who shop at tool stores.
It's dangerous. You start watching those at 11 p.m., and suddenly it's sunrise, and you've ordered 4 Japanese water stones and a saw that looks like a kitchen knife.
So, what's the big deal? Why is Japanese joinery having such a moment vertically in modern design? Is it just because it looks cool on Instagram, or is there a structural reason?
It's both, but the structural side is where the real magic hides. See, back in the day, Japan didn't have an abundance of iron for nails, and they have earthquakes, lots of them. If you build a rigid house with nails and the ground starts shaking, the wood splits and the house falls down. But if you use these complex interlocking joints, what they call sugid, the house can actually flex. The joints absorb the energy. It's a building that breathes.
So, it's a giant wooden spring. That's clever. But most of our listeners aren't building pagodas, they're building coffee tables. Does this stuff actually translate to a suburban garage?
Absolutely. Bracht's book breaks down over 50 joints. Some are so complex they look like an M.C. Escher drawing, but others, like the arigata or the sliding dovetail, are the bread and butter of smart furniture making. I remember the first time I tried a hidden mitered dovetail. I thought I was being clever, but I ended up with a corner that looked like it had been chewed on by a confused beaver.
I remember that piece. You tried to hide the gaps with sawdust and glue, didn't you?
I used enough wood filler to qualify as a chemical plant. But that's the thing. Japanese joinery doesn't let you hide. It demands that you understand the grain. Most of us treat wood like a static material, like plastic or metal. But wood is a bundle of straws. If you don't respect the direction those straws are running, the joint is going to fail, or worse, it's going to look muddy.
Bracht talks about this apprenticeship he did in Leipzig. He was learning to build shoji and fusuma, those sliding paper doors. That seems like high-stakes woodworking. 1 millimeter off, and the whole door sticks.
Exactly. And that's the pro tip people miss. In Western woodworking, we often sneak up on a fit. We sand, we file, we pray. In the Japanese tradition, the layout is the entire battle. You spend 80% of your time with a marking knife and a square, making lines that are thinner than a hair. If your line is thick, your joint is loose. My first Japanese-style gate, I used a carpenter's pencil. Great for framing a shed, terrible for joinery. I ended up with a tenon that had so much wiggle room it could have played trombone.
So, for the person listening who's looking at their rack of big box store chisels and feeling inadequate, where do they start? Do they need to sell their car to buy a set of hand-forged Japanese blades?
Heavens no. There's this myth that you need to be a billionaire to do this. Dorian's book actually has a massive section on the tools, and the secret isn't the price tag, it's the sharpness. A $20 chisel that you've actually learned to hone is better than a $200 one that's been sitting in a box.
Okay, but the saws are different, right? They pull instead of push?
They do. It's the Ryoba or the Dozuki. And let me tell you, the first time you use a pull saw, your brain is going to reject it like a bad transplant. You'll try to push it, the thin blade will buckle, and you'll feel like you've forgotten how to move your own arms. But once it clicks, it's like drawing with a pencil. Because the blade is under tension while you're cutting, it can be much thinner. Less wood turned into dust means less effort and more control.
I've seen Dorian do those kanawatsugi joints, the ones that look like a lightning bolt. They seem impossible. How do you even begin to cut a shape that locks in 3 different directions?
You start by accepting that you're going to mess up the first 6 tries. No, really, the secret is the relief. In those complex joints, there are parts that touch and parts that don't. You only need the faces that transfer the load to be perfect. The rest is just clearance. If you try to make every single surface of a complex joint have a friction fit, you'll never get it together. It'll bind up halfway, and you'll have to get the sledgehammer out, which is a one-way ticket to Heartbreak City.
That sounds like a metaphor for life, Tiger. Only worry about the parts that carry the load.
Usually, woodworking is just life with more splinters. Dorian talks about how he was always surrounded by design books as a kid. His mom taught industrial design. That's the bridge between the old-school Japanese master and the modern maker. It's not just about the craft, it's about the aesthetic. Why hide a joint with paint when the joint itself is the most beautiful part of the furniture?
That leads to modern applications. We're seeing this everywhere now, exposed joinery in minimalist apartments. But is it practical for a piece of furniture that's going to be moved around by a college student or survives a move?
It's more practical. A well-cut Japanese joint is a mechanical lock. Nails rust. Wood glue eventually becomes brittle and fails over 50 or 60 years. But a joint that uses the wood's own tension to pull itself tighter? That'll outlive you, your kids, and probably the house it's sitting in.
Okay, let's talk about the shop disasters for a second. We've looked at the pristine photos in Brock's book. Tell me about the time you tried to go full Japanese master and it went sideways.
Oh, it was a bench. A simple garden bench. I wanted to do these stub tenons with a sliding dovetail. I'd spent all night reading up on it. I had my Japanese water stones out. I had a fresh pot of tea. I was ready. I spent 4 hours on one leg. It was beautiful, tight as a drum. I went to tap it home for the final fit, and I forgot that the wood I was using, some white oak, was a bit punky in the center.
Oh no.
I hit it once. Click. Beautiful. Hit it twice. Crack. The entire leg split right down the middle because I hadn't accounted for the wedging action of the dovetail. I was trying to be so precise that I didn't leave room for the wood to be wood. I ended up sitting on the floor of my shop, staring at 2 halves of a very expensive piece of oak, wondering if I should just take up knitting.
What did you do?
I did what every woodworker does. I swore a bit, went inside, ate a sandwich, and then came back and turned that accident into a feature. I glued it back together with a contrasting wedge of walnut. Now it looks like I meant to do it. That's the real secret. A master isn't someone who doesn't make mistakes. They're just someone who knows how to make the mistake look like a design choice.
Dorian mentions he wants to cut every joint in existence. That's a bold goal. In his book, he covers everything from 400-year-old temple joints to modern innovations. What counts as a modern Japanese joint?
It's the integration of power tools without losing the hand tool soul. Using a router to clear out the bulk of a mortise, but finishing the corners with a hand-forged chisel. Or using CNC technology to cut the rough shapes of these complex geometries that used to take a week to lay out. It's taking the intelligence of the joint and applying it to materials like plywood or even metal.
So you're saying I don't have to do it all by hand? You just gave half the audience their weekend back.
You still need the hand skills for the kiss. That final shaving that makes the joint go from it fits to it belongs. You can't get that with a machine. There's a psychological component too. Dorian talks about being a joinery fetishist. There's a deep, primal satisfaction in seeing 2 complex shapes slide together and defy gravity.
I get it. It's like a secret handshake between you and the tree.
Exactly. And that leads to the biggest mistake I see beginners make when they try this. They try to do it with wet wood. They go to the local lumber yard, grab some construction-grade fir that's still practically screaming from the sawmill, and try to cut a kasanetsugi.
And I'm guessing that goes poorly once the wood dries out?
It's a tragedy in slow motion. You cut a perfect joint on Monday, and by Friday, the wood has shrunk by 3% and your tight joint looks like a loose tooth. If you're going to dive into Japanese joinery, your wood choice is your foundation. You need stable, kiln-dried material, or better yet, wood that's been air drying in your shop for a year. You have to let the wood settle before you ask it to do gymnastics.
So for someone who picks up Dorian Brock's book this afternoon, what's the starter pack of joints? What are the 3 things they should try before they lose their mind?
First, the half lap. It sounds boring, but doing a Japanese style half lap where the shoulders are perfectly flush is harder than it looks. Second, a simple sliding dovetail. It'll teach you about friction and how much meat you need to leave so the joint doesn't blow out. Third, the mortise and tenon, but do it without glue. Try to make it a drawbore where a wooden peg pulls the whole thing together. If you can do those three, you've got the DNA for everything else.
Is there a certain mindset Dorian talks about beyond the tools and the wood?
He talks about the search. Woodworking for him isn't a destination. It's that apprenticeship mentality. In Japan, you might spend 3 years just learning how to sharpen your tools and flatten a board. We're in such a rush to have the table. But the joy, the real workshop high, is in the moment the chisel pairings look like lace and the shop smells like cedar.
I think people are intimidated by that, the idea that you have to be worthy of the craft.
Man, if worthiness was a requirement, they would have kicked me out of my shop years ago. The craft is the teacher. You don't get good to do the joints, you do the joints to get good. That's why Dorian's work is so important. He's showing us that these secrets aren't secrets at all. They're just a series of logical steps and a lot of practice.
Okay, Tiger, I'm inspired. But give me the real talk before we wrap up. What's the one thing people are going to forget when they start their first Japanese joint tomorrow morning?
They're going to forget to keep their marking knife sharp. They'll use a dull blade. It'll follow the grain of the wood instead of the straight edge of the square, and their entire layout will be crooked before they even pick up a saw. A dull knife is a liar. It tells you the line is here when it's actually 2 millimeters to the left.
A dull knife is a liar. I like that. So the takeaway? Don't be afraid of the complexity, but respect the preparation.
Right on the money. Pick up the book, look at the pictures, and then go into your shop and try to make 2 pieces of scrap wood fit together so well that you can't see the seam. It'll frustrate the heck out of you, and it'll be the most fun you've had with your clothes on.
Well, on that note, I think I need to go buy some water stones, or at least watch a few more of Dorian's videos.
Do it. But don't blame me when you start looking at your nails and screws like they're a personal insult to your craftsmanship. Once you go down this rabbit hole, there's no turning back. You're a joinery fetishist now. Welcome to the club.
Thanks for the deep dive, Tiger. I'll see you in the sawdust.
See you there, Alex. Keep those blades sharp and your lines true.